Hello, I am Dr. Katie Kinney with the Scribe Writing Center at Covenant Theological Seminary, and today I'm going to be talking about reading, which I'm sure if you're engaged in seminary studies is taking up a large amount of your time these days. And so today we're going to think about reading primarily to capture an argument so that you can understand the structures and the rhetorical moves that an author is making. Where I'm going to be talking about how academic reading is different than reading in other contexts of our lives. And we're going to be breaking down our conversation into approaching a text as something to understand, as something to process, and then as something to remember. So 3 skill sets and strategies for each of those, how to accomplish them. I'd like to start out just by reminding us that the world we live in is information rich. We encounter text all the time. The internet is what I'm alluding to, as you may be guessing already. But academic reading is different. So even though we are fairly saturated, surrounded by text all the time, the skills that we need to encounter and process an academic work, whether it's a journal article, a book chapter, an essay, maybe even a paper we're writing ourselves, these skills are going to be different from the skills we use to process text on social media, on online newspapers, blogs, and all the various texts that we encounter through our day. So I'd like to remind us to be aware of how the internet and our texted contexts can affect our habits relating text. So when you're reading an article online, how easy is it to click over to look up something else, to read halfway and then end up on a different web page, to skim something very quickly, to bounce along through a comment section. It's a very different type of reading than sitting down with a book and reading page by page, noting nuances and arguments and claims, and having a sustained attention being paid to that single argument. So there's a discipline involved, and don't be surprised when that discipline is something that requires cultivation, that requires work to learn how to do. So part of reading efficiently is cultivating your ability to pay attention for longer periods of time. One quick tip or trick that you can use to start developing that skill is to use timers. So maybe you start with a 20-minute timer and you turn it on, and during those 20 minutes you do nothing but focus on your text. Then you take a 5-minute break. Maybe by in a week or two, that timer is now at 45 minutes and you're taking a 15-minute break. But you're focusing on your one subject for 45 minutes, then taking a reasonable break. It's tiring intellectually, mentally, to be focused on something that long. So give yourself a break and then do another 45-minute session. So use the tools you have around you to help you cultivate this discipline. Figure out what works for you in terms of location. Be mindful about what is distracting you and how can you create an environment that is going to best support your efforts. One other thing I'd like to point out is thinking about whether you're going to approach your text as a paper document, as a physical book, or a printed out article, or if you're going to read it electronically. Oftentimes electronic resources are easier to access. They may feel more convenient as they're portable. You can click through things and maybe search them differently. But I'd like to point out some of the benefits of paper too, to help us make a informed decision about what we use to access our information. Reading on paper has been shown to reduce eye strain. So if that has been an issue of headaches or just keeping your eyes on the words has become difficult, try moving to paper. Reading on paper has been shown to increase reading speed and comprehension. The ways that our eyes have been habituated to move through text when it is printed on paper is different than the way We have trained our eyes to move through text on a screen on the internet, basically. So think about that. If you want to read faster, print it out or get the book. Books are also typically easier to navigate. I can flip quickly from the beginning to the end. I can look at the index. I have this physical object that is helping guide me through an argument. You can scroll back and forth through a virtual copy of a text, but it is a very different tactile experience to understand the opening, the closing, presentation of claims as a physical object. All right, so we're going to move into 3 areas now. First, we're going to talk about understanding what we're reading. Then we're going to cover processing what we're reading. Finally, finishing up with remembering. So these are 3 critical tasks involved in approaching an academic text if you want to be able to respond to it in your own writing, or if you want to be able to engage it during class discussions. These are 3 things that you're going to need to accomplish in your reading process. So to begin, understanding what you read. We sometimes will think of a book as something that we read linearly. So like a novel, I wouldn't pick up Oliver Twist and read the end of it, then flip back and read some of the beginning, and then flip back and read the middle or something. That wouldn't make a lot of sense if I wanted to understand the story that Dickens was trying to tell in there. But when it comes to an academic text, it makes a lot of sense to jump around like that, to read strategically, not linearly. So try reading the beginning, the introduction of the article. Maybe that's an abstract or ended introduction. The first chapter of an academic book, the first paragraph or 2 of a chapter, and then read the ending. Skip the middle and go all the way to the end. Spoilers. Find out what their conclusion is before you read the middle. You can also do pre-reads, which is basically another word for skim. So get the idea of what their argument is going to be at the beginning, dot through and figure out what their primary claims will be, and then see how they encapsulate their final conclusions at the end. So get an idea of the general direction of the argument before starting to read for details throughout. If you already know some of the content you're going to encounter, it's going to help you have a map for placing the details that you encounter. This is also going to help increase your efficiency. If you have a favorite book that you've read, 6 times, I bet that the 6th time you read it, you were able to read it a lot faster than the first time. In part because you're not figuring out now where is this headed. You're able to read and pick up details more quickly because you already have a map of where the text is going. Another part of understanding the text is going to be taking notes. So beginning to interact. This is your interaction, your engagement with the text. So understanding it is not a passive getting the information into your head. It's also an interactive engagement with the ideas. Some strategies you can use. Some of these you might take a liking to, others you might find cumbersome, so use whatever works for you. But some ideas would be to label each paragraph with what the topic of that paragraph is, or what function is this paragraph playing, what claim is present in it. That will often be found in the very first sentence of the paragraph. You can take a look at headers and subheaders. So these would be, the little titles in italics, perhaps dotted throughout a book chapter. Figure out what structure the author is overlaying the chapter, have an outline there. And then pay attention to organizational signposts. These are words like therefore, or for example, to conclude, in summary. All of these are telling you things about what the author is doing rhetorically right then. Are they recapping what their argument is? Are they about to lay down a piece of evidence for a claim that they just made? So they make claim, they say, for example, oh, now I see the structure. I have claim, for example, evidence. Note those, highlight them, underline them, do whatever you need to do to have the structure become visually apparent to you. Remember when you are taking notes that the future you will not remember what current you is thinking. So I do encourage you to write and complete sentences. Unless you know exactly what it means, I don't recommend writing like question mark in the margin. Because in 2 weeks from now, are you going to know what that meant? Did you think that the author was unclear? Did you have a question that you wanted to remember there? Future you is going to look back at current you and say, what were you thinking? I don't know. So be specific and do future you a favor when you're taking notes. I suggest that you write down your own questions, whether it's something like, this is unclear, I don't understand this piece of information, or if it's something along the lines of, I'm not sure that this evidence is compelling, these are the flaws I see in the argument. Go ahead and write those down as you're going through. Paraphrasing, this would be taking the author's argument and putting it into your own words. Always note when you're taking notes, when you are directly quoting, when you are paraphrasing, or when you are summarizing. But paraphrasing can help you to make sure that you're really understanding what they are saying. And by putting it into your own words, you are engaging it at a level that is later going to help you recall the information that you are finding. Finally, assign or highlight the keywords in a chapter. So this would be kind of like tags on an online article. What is this about? What are the topics? Can you put in 4 or 5 words what this segment of text is about? This is going to help you recall it later on, and this is also going to help you comprehend what is going on. Moving on to processing the information. So you've taken notes, you started out by getting a general idea of the flow of the text. You took notes that are going to help you see the argument that the author is making, and now you need to begin to process the argument, so the claims and the evidence that the author has presented. A first step in processing an argument would be relating it to previous knowledge. How can you connect this to other readings you've had in this course? How can you connect it to experiences you've had? How can you connect it to other courses or work experiences, ministry experiences that you've had? Making those connections is a critical part of creating kind of an academic web of knowledge for yourself. Second, identify the audience that the author is writing to. Who are they trying to convince, and what types of evidence are compelling for that audience can help you understand how this argument is structured and why it is presented in the form that it is. And then identify the intervention that the author is making. In a very scholarly work, something with footnotes and bibliographies and stuff, very often this information will be implied in the footnotes. So who is the author citing? Who are they, whose work are they building on? Whose work are they refuting? What are they saying? This has been what we've said so far, but I think we need to add this information, or I think this was incorrect. We need to go in this other direction. What is the intervention they are making in the scholarly conversation? Another option you can do to begin processing the argument is to imagine other possibilities. All right, so what values or assumptions are being held or upheld by the author? If they were to have a different emphasis, or if they were to center their work on different experiences, how might their argument change? Begin to see different perspectives on the topic that they took up. And finally, I think this is really helpful to kind of bring you up to a graduate level processing of an argument, is to imagine the next steps. So if you were this researcher, if you were this theologian, and you had written this work, and you were going to continue working on this topic, what are your next research questions? What do you need to work on next? What is the continuing trajectory of this argument? Can begin to help cement the processing of the argument. Finally, we're going to talk about remembering what you have read. Outlines can be very helpful here. This may be, I find it personally helpful when I'm reading a book that I want to remember well, an academic book, is every time I get to the end of a chapter, I will write an outline of that chapter. If I own the book myself, my favorite place to write it is usually like on the blank pages in the beginning and ending of the book. I'll just have bullet point outlines of the entire book with page numbers written in on those blank pages, because then I never lose where my notes went. But outlining what the argument and pieces of evidence were are going to help you recall them quickly. Summarizing things in your own words, so maybe if it's a important article or book or a book chapter for your own research, go ahead and take the 10 minutes to write a 200-word summary of what is there, what is useful to you, what is less useful to you, why you might return to this work in your research. Go ahead and write it down in prose form or bullet points if you're really wanting to move along. But in some way summarize and have basically a book review for your own use of all the sources that you access, or at least certainly the most helpful sources that you access. Finally, quickly or soon after you read the text, review the materials again. So look over the notes you took, all your marginalia or your accompanying notebook of notes. Look over the outline the next day. This doesn't have to take a long time. So if you read a book from Monday to Wednesday for a class and you're going to discuss it on Friday, on Thursday, take 10 minutes, look at your notes again, look at the outline, just recall and remember what information, what arguments you're engaging with. Psychologists and those who study the mind know that the more often or the more times we have forgotten a piece of information and then learned it again, the more likely we are to have a longer term memory of it. So in allowing yourself some distance from an argument and then reminding yourself of what the argument is, distance from and then reminding yourself, this is going to start making those neural pathways for that information sink even deeper and deeper into your mind, into your ability to recall and use this information. So go ahead and use that. 5 to 10 minutes, 4 times a week might get you a lot farther than 2 hours on one afternoon in terms of being able to consistently recall information. So today we looked at thinking about how we encounter text in our world today. We looked at some strategies for understanding what we're reading, for processing an argument, and for recalling, remembering what we have read. If you want to discuss any of these strategies in person, the Scribe Writing Center offers both in-person and online consultations that can be made through the library website. I'd love to get to meet you face-to-face. And otherwise, I hope you have a great day and stay warm on this January. So, thank you.